In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is someone I'm excited to introduce. He's a passionate entrepreneur and a dedicated leader who's built a powerful SaaS platform focused on solving integration challenges for small and mid-sized businesses, working with clients in hospitality, retail, and other service-based commerce companies, to name a few. Prior to starting his company, he's also held senior positions at PayPal and HP. He's the co-founder and CEO of Link2Any. Sriram Subramanian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and I'd love to start by exploring a bit of a broader perspective for the conversation, because as we're going to dive into some of the key milestones and changes that you've led, I know a significant part of that is really cultivating the right mindset and building the right environment to drive innovation. So I'd love to talk about that. But first, maybe to give our listeners some context, can you start with just a couple sentences about what your company does?
Sure, yes. So Link2Any works in the retail and restaurant tech space, where the problem we're solving is often restaurateurs, retailers have trouble migrating to new best-of-breed systems, cloud-based systems, right? Whether that's the point of sale, accounting, loyalty, or other kinds of systems. And often what happens is that the platforms have them sign up to new systems, but they don't take care of their historical data and a smooth onboarding process. So Link onboards entirely in an automated way, helping both the merchant and the platform. And then once they have a new stack, the other major problem that we solve is integrating the data real-time sync across all of those different systems. For example, if an order shows up in your DoorDash or in a point of sale, that needs to then get pushed into the accounting system so that your taxes are done right. So we take care of integrations as well.
Great. Thank you. So tell me, what are some of the strategies or approaches that have had the biggest impact on your company's success when you think about kind of the internal environment and your leadership?
I think I'd break it down into two or three major buckets, right? I would say one is the sales and marketing approach. One, I would maybe talk about the product, and the third is around team building. So when you think about sales and go-to-market, when we are serving the SMB segment, and I think most of the audience would know that it's incredibly hard to sell and scale into that segment. And we started by working directly with retailers and restaurants, and we found that it's either you need to raise a lot of venture capital or find ways in which there is a very efficient path to go to market. And that efficiency came when we found that we could actually sell through the platforms, meaning our customer becomes the platform is the one that becomes the paying customer, and their sales teams, if they have a marketplace, we can list there. Those are the places that take us to market to their end customers, which are our users, right? The retailers and restaurants. And so once we started validated that with, let's say, one point of sale, one accounting system, we were able to start scaling that. And that has really created a lot of efficiency because we haven't had to really build out a sales team. So the go-to-market has actually evolved where these companies and their channels effectively serve as our sales teams. The second piece, I would say, from a product standpoint, is that you have to be on the edge, pushing the boundary in terms of just innovation. When you talk about, like, of course, it's a cliched word to some degree to say, how do you stay on the edge and keep pushing while also delivering what you need, right, for your bread and butter. But it's really important to find that balance in terms of saying there's some element of research and being and AI is a great example of that, right? So today LLMs and agent-centric models are the talk of the town, but a lot of companies struggle to define how do we incorporate these things. So what we did is took a couple of key problems. For us, it was mapping from one system to the other. is an important problem that we needed to solve. So we used AI. We were in lab mode for a few months, right, where a couple of our engineers were just hammering it down to see. And so they were able to crack the problem. We went and showcased it to one of the largest point of sale and payment systems in North America, and they loved seeing that first demo. And then we are working through different phases of taking it to market, and that is hopefully will pay off for us. But if we were not, I think, making that push into this new research, it won't be as exciting for even prospects and customers, right? Because they are also looking and thinking about the same things. So I think even though it's a hard balance, but it pays off in the long run, especially for startups. And the third aspect I would put around is team building. Is when you look at hiring and scaling, it's really important to, in every step of the way, bring in the right people. There's often this pressure to double or triple your team, and companies do that within a year, and then they have to scale back because there were a few wrong hires, or what you expected, in your forecast was too optimistic. So we often rely on referrals. We would keep a moderate pace on hiring, and then we would align it in many ways with where revenue is coming. So that has helped us, retain people over the long term. And then the other important thing is that don't necessarily go for the recognized names in terms of experience or colleges, right? Find a way to assess raw talent and then be willing to groom those people. So we've had people who have stayed for several years from day one who are still with the company. And that has really helped because then they build both functional and domain expertise. So I think that finding your own formula around team building, which is really works for the company and the culture, is the other thing that has really helped us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I know in what 5 or 6 years you've grown pretty rapidly in terms of the number of employees. So, how do you kind of? It sounds like finding the right people through those sources that you mentioned. How do you kind of bring them into the fold and kind of help them kind of fit the culture of the company?
Yeah. So one is that you need to do the culture fit assessment upfront during the hiring process itself. And then even before they onboard, this might be a month or two, right? When they've agreed on an offer and joining date, they get sent an employee playbook, which is, and a lot of companies have built that, and we took the time to do it in 2 or 3 iterations. We've actually published it, made it available through our social channels and for other startups to see as well. So that really helps set the tone, and people understand everything, right, from the history, values, how things work at the company. So a lot of times these prospective new joinees would come in with questions well before the joining date, and either me or others in the leadership also, we make time to talk to folks, right? It's not like there's a fresh hire coming and they will only talk to their managers, right? So it's very important that the leadership makes time to engage with these people, and then to explain, like, what are we doing, why are we the way we are, right? Those types of aspects. And then uh, during the onboarding, we pair people up. There is usually the buddy system that works well, where uh, new joinees in usually a peer or someone that is can guide them maybe 1 or 2 years ahead, usually shadows them and helps them ramp up. And of course, we have documentation around how people, what are the things like for week one, what do they want to do, and stuff like that. So, and then as time goes by, we don't, as of now, we have not yet implemented very strict systems like OKRs. But we broadly, through our all hands and published high level goals, teams find ways to align. And we did try systems like OKRs like last year, but just found that the operational overhead that was involved and alignment that was needed was very difficult to achieve for our type of team. And then I found that even without such a granular structure or process, it is still possible to align and achieve goals as long as overall communication is set up right, where people are hearing from the leadership on a regular basis. We never miss our all hands, which is at least once a month. And if there are some key events that need to be talked about, right, like we had to make a few small cuts. So we immediately like preponed our all hands, which was 2 weeks out, but we immediately made it the day after when the cuts had to be made to just address what's top of mind rather than lingering concerns. So I think um, I hope that helps, right? Like these were the few things that we like to focus on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know it can get a bit tricky when you're growing quickly, and especially having teams kind of in different parts of the world. So it sounds like you really get ahead of any communications and all of that, which is great. I want to come back to something that you were talking about earlier around kind of the product and driving that innovation. And I think that balance of kind of being leading edge and continuing to push the envelope while at the same time needing to kind of keep the engine going and what you call the bread and butter. Like how do you make sure you keep that balance?
I think the first simple thing to do is make sure that your customers are continuing to be happy, right? Like there is this healthy feedback loop where they're getting what they want and then they're coming in with new requests, right? So growing your accounts to the extent that an account can grow, it's important to monitor that because that's indicative of like the state of health. So you need your accounts manager, product managers, etc., to keep a pulse on that. If that's happening, right, and that's being reflected in the revenue, then you can say, well, that's let's say 80% of my team, which is able to cater to that. And now let's pull out these 2 or 3 people that are both motivated and going to be good at research. And then we paired, what happened was one of our investors, for example, had spent years in machine learning and AI, like well before it became the in thing. So, and so he was willing to step in a very active, not full time, but like very active advisory role. And so I thought that would be great for him to then guide this operational team, the research team. So it became a 4-person unit, right? And then the people that the senior engineers were also involved with day-to-day operations, but to about maybe not more than 30-40% of the time was going there, right? The rest was mirrored around the goals that we have to crack these problems. And then the other thing we layered on top is to say, how do we showcase this? Like every opportunity we get with important prospects, let's start putting this out as proof of concepts, right? So which is what I was alluding to earlier, right? When we went to one of the largest fintech in the US and showed the progress, like with our AI and LLM, whatever we had built, that resulted in great feedback, and it also created timelines for us to deliver the next iteration. So the next meeting for that discussion is actually the coming this Thursday, the 23rd. So the team has very finite windows to then produce the next iteration, and they have to make the trade-offs, right? Because they have heard firsthand from the CEO of this other company what improvements are needed. And it's not arbitrary timelines. It's actually now a customer that wants to see this technology being used. So that also creates like the right environment and I would say natural deadlines to follow, which even I don't have to necessarily push for. It's clear to the team because they were in that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned investors, and I wanted to hear like what was your mindset going into the fundraising process, and then are there any things you think about differently now, kind of being on the other side of it?
Yeah, I think there's this basic truth in the startup world that you want your investors to be way more than money, and there is the tactical help they can provide, and maybe industry in our case having some kind of retail or restaurant related industry expertise would really go a long way. But I think it's also very important to understand and do reference checks on knowing who they are as people, especially under pressure or when things go wrong. Is there word on the street about how they treat companies and founders in tough situations? I think those are important things to research because often you're in these tight timelines to raise, and you're talking to a lot of people, and uh, s- you may skip some of these steps in terms of the diligence. But it's very important because that relationship obviously can last years, right? Could be even a decade, depending on the journey that the company is taking. So so it's not just about it's the same with employees, right? You're not just looking for their skill set or contribution. You really want to know them as, are these good humans? Will they help others in the team and all of those things? So I think it's really important to build that uh, rapport and understanding with investors well ahead of when the money comes. And the way that we do that, for example, is I have a lot of folks on our quarterly updates that are people, I would say, even like friends of the company. A lot of them, I don't even know if they are investors or and so on. And one of our early biggest checks came from someone that I didn't know was going to be investing. That person had just retired from a large conglomerate and decided that suddenly that maybe angel investing would be a good thing, right? And then I got a call saying, I've been seeing these updates for the past 3 quarters. This seems interesting. What do you think? Right? Like, here's how I can add value. And so that was good, right? Because I already had known that person for about 9 months, and I could get a sense that, yeah, that they check all these boxes. And the fact that they have been already tracking the company, there's that interest and motivation to do something. So I felt like this model of keeping a broader pool of people in your orbit of people that know what's going on in the company, and that brings unexpected help and sometimes investments as well. The other important, I guess, learning, and that this depends on this whole, how fast do you want to grow? How much do you value control in execution, right? So you could, um, let's say, over the life of a company, let's say they need 7 million, 8 million to be successful, right? Let's say it's not you have to raise 100 million to have a billion plus exit, but let's take the more median normal case of finite amounts of capital where you can get to profitability and execute beyond that. You can actually achieve that mostly with angels and small funds and without having to give up too much board control or overall handing over the company, right? And that becomes important because, again, it's very hard to assess what happens in the long run over very difficult markets and situations. So, I would urge founders to think hard about how they want to, you know, take capital in smaller chunks and be very careful about who they're giving control to.
Yeah, I think especially with so much changing in the business landscape today, what you need as far as financing, what you need as far as kind of skill sets in that kind of extended advisory team can change quickly. So I like that approach of take just what you need and leave the door open for others.
Right.
But also the way you're talking about kind of managing that kind of investor ecosystem, it's really like a brand awareness play for kind of the investor
Right.
ecosystem, right? So that
Right.
people are coming to you, you're creating a bit of that inbound pull and kind of leaving multiple doors open.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with how you nurture prospects and, in the same way, right? How you manage and grow your investor ecosystem. But in this case, it becomes a little more critical because your investor relationships are much more long living.
Right, right. Very hard to untangle from that in either direction.
Right. So,
Yeah. I'd love to hear a bit about your leadership style. How do you describe your kind of personal leadership style?
so I think that I try hard is to not interfere once, people's ownership in areas are set. I deeply trust their model of execution and how they're going to do whatever they need to get done, right? Unless things are not going as per track, and in which case we would have sometimes group discussions, and other times, if there are more sensitive topics, I would intervene one on one. But what I have found is like creating that autonomy is very important for people, especially in early stage settings, for people to feel like they have the power and control to do things, right, and not be micromanaged, right? So that's, I would say, the first important bucket. The other is to have this healthy amount of tension in terms of, are we doing the best we can? Are we growing fast enough? Are we delivering on the roadmap in the way that we should be? Um, but doing that in a way that is healthy tension. It's respectful and not pushing people in the wrong way, right? So aligning it again to what do we need to achieve as a company to survive and grow? What are investors expecting from us? Being transparent about those things. And what do we need to really win in the market? Like everybody wants to win. And so if you say, look, if you're aspiring for market leadership in the retail POS segment, here are the things we need to do this year. It's pretty much non-negotiable. If we don't, here's two other players that will do it. And being number 3 or 4 is not going to help us in any way. So here's all that we need to do to get there. And then being polite but firm when we are lagging behind, and then calling people out. Like I said, it's okay to call out even in groups. I think there's some sensitivity around. There's this whole, there are books that have been written talking about the importance of one-on-ones, and I'm sure they are important. But there is also this group accountability that helps, right? To say, we are all in this, like you can question me, I can question you uh, in the right way. And we are all working towards this difficult goal. But we know what needs to be done, and we'll do our best. So just kind of keeping that push where you don't get too comfortable, and you're okay being challenged and challenging others, right? Like, so having that healthy environment is important. And again, it's a very fine balance, because a lot of people, some people that you hire may not have that finesse or poise under pressure, and then they may rub others the wrong way and so there is intervention that is needed. But for the most part, that is how we operate, and we've managed to keep, I think, a decent balance among these different facets.
Yeah. Are there any practices or signs that you kind of have in place to help make sure you're maintaining that balance? Like, do you leave it up to individual managers, or is there anything that happens kind of more holistically?
Yeah, we do some of these, like we do a leadership cross-functional sync on a regular, like a weekly basis. And we also, I would always tell individual leads to say, if you're not getting the support, right, from whichever function or another lead, call that out before it goes too far, right? And tag me and others. And we use, like a lot of companies, we use Slack pretty effectively to get things done, because most people are in different locations. So we would, and then I have worked hard on creating this open door model of just call me directly when you want to talk about something that's not going well or need help. I will step back into being a a PM, or helping the design team, or so wherever the problem lies today that is holding us back, I will step in and make sure that whoever's, work one on one leading that function and get it unblocked. So I'll drop other things that, even if I'm in the middle of a raise or other things, I will give priority to helping whoever's in facing problems, like helping them be successful. Because that, if you leave that unattended, like if that's the biggest roadblock for the company, I think often what happens is that leaders would say that a function manager, that's their job. I can, I'll just drop an email, or I'll give some high level guidance, but that's not enough. You actually need to be in the trenches and solve the problem. And that model creates a lot of urgency for the team as well, when they see that the leadership will not hesitate to just jump in and do what's needed. So there's, again, it goes back to that healthy tension, is to say, like, I'd better have my ducks in a row, because I know that the leadership will intervene right away if this is not going where it should be.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like a good way to both kind of show you mean business and lead by example, right? That you're kind of willing
Right.
and
And it has to be genuine and sincere, and you have to, like, be empathetic to, look, this person is facing a genuine blocker, and that's part of their growth. And You just have to help them see that and get through this temporary roadblock. But hopefully that then results in them taking on more and more and not having, you don't having to step in, right?
Right.
And uh, you know, I was, there's a lot of interesting quotes from Jensen Huang, right? The NVIDIA CEO. One of the things like that stood out for me, he talks about torturing people into greatness. And so it could be interpreted in many different ways, but the idea is that you you go in and you push people and keep helping them grow. So as long as their heart and mind is in the right place, and of course there's a basic intelligence and skill match, which is why they're here with you, they will eventually like grow and do greater things. But you have to be patient. So you can't just expect that this will happen. That in 6 months they will be. That might be a 2 or 3 year process, and the entire unit has to be patient around that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's really, you can do everything to kind of enable the team, give them the time, set them up for success. And then ultimately everyone needs to step up for themselves.
Right.
Right. I want to shift gears a bit, and I imagine your business keeps your plate very full. But is there
Yeah.
anything you're focused on at the moment that you're most passionate or excited about outside of the company?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't, as you rightly said, I think running a startup is a full plate in itself. But my, you know, my wife and I, a few years ago, we had adopted our daughters, and and that happened in India. And so we were in India for several years. And so we saw a lot of challenges in the ecosystem. And then she ended up starting a nonprofit in the space. It's called Where Are India's Children? And then that grew into something good, and it is starting to have an impact. So I'm not, of course, operationally involved, but I like to stay connected in terms of the work and making sure that that organization thrives as well. And so my wife, of course, is like super passionate about it. And whatever I can do in terms of the minimal support, I like to do over there. So yeah, but that's one of the major threads. But other than that, whatever helps in terms of keeping the sanity and a good state of mind, right? Whether that's making sure there's like meditation, yoga, those things are part of the routine, and trying to make sure that the team also is able to function and treat this as a marathon, like thinking about all of those things. So but nothing. There's not too much room outside of that as of now to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a company and children and being involved with a nonprofit and all of that is sounds like a very full plate. Congratulations on your daughters. I'm curious on like the yoga and meditation and the things that you do for yourself. Are there ways that you kind of force yourself to make that time? Because I know it can be really easy to kind of have a busy day or week or month and kind of let those things slip. So how do you kind of hold yourself accountable to that?
Yeah, I interestingly, I mean, there's a lot of written about this in terms of people starting at 5 a.m. and being able to do that like clockwork. I have not been able to do that, but I think it's always top of mind for me. So even if I find 10 minutes and like I'm trying to create an important pitch or do anything that requires a lot of focus, I would just unplug for a few minutes, have a very short session around. Sometimes it could be just a period of a small workout. Other times it could be a 10-minute meditation period, and that would just help like think more clearly or focus better, and it more than pays for itself, right? In terms of you're in a better state to operate. It's a bit of an ad hoc routine, but I think in terms of one consistent slot, I try to do it at the end of the day, right? So it might sometimes be close to midnight, but then I would just sit down, light a lamp and just sit down for some time and try to do it, because that there is no way you're going to get distracted at that point. So you may lose a few minutes of sleep, but that again, it feels like that's the right way to wrap up end the day, and I think it helps overall in well-being.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. For me, I'm almost the opposite. The end of the day is probably where I need to put a little bit more focus, but I'm usually too exhausted and do go straight to bed. For me, it's the morning routine and having
Yeah.
that discipline around the morning workout and gratitude and reflection and kind of starting the day off right. Uh,
And that works. Yeah, it works so well for a lot of people. And I think so there's some magic in that formula. It's about like, can you do it consistently is the question, right?
I know. Ideally, we built that sandwich, right? Morning and nighttime, and then the day is wonderful in between.
Right. Sandwich. I like that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, your childhood? Like, how did you get to kind of the career that you have today?
Yeah, so I grew up mostly on army campuses in India. So my father was in the Indian Army, and so that was very good exposure all around, with a lot of focus on sports and outdoors. And so I was into sailing quite a bit, and so part of it was that my parents were quite comfortable sending me over to like, okay, there's this, you're going to go race. I had never been like seen an ocean, I think when I was in sixth grade. And there were these bigger boats. So there were a lot of unknowns in terms of what that could be. But my parents were like, yeah, go try it out. And it was rough, but it was kind of like early on, I got this idea of like, you can try and fail. And I think for me, really, that came from sports, that it's just okay to just jump in into like and try something crazy. And I think that, among other things, that was one of the formative, helpful experiences, right? So I did all the way, stayed back into college, got interested in technology, and in engineering, and I was very keen to pursue a master's. So that brought me to the US. So I was at Carnegie Mellon, very much into wireless technologies, security, and so on. And then there was this whole thing around hearing about the startup world and building something from scratch. So that's what then drew me to the Valley. So I joined TrustGenX, which was a security. It was the first company that built single sign-on technology, right? So what you do today when you sign in from Google and go to another app or a Facebook login, right? So that the basic of that technology was starting to get built by this company. And so I joined that. It was only 6 people at the time. And so that kind of gave me sort of the initial boost to say, oh, this is how a small company operates. And you would just be opening the door for the office on certain days and nobody would be here, and here's how you get stuff done. And so luckily that went through into a good acquisition. That's how I landed at HP. Um, and then it moved into like going into PayPal, learning more about all of the space. And then I was, of course, deep in technology, so I decided to pursue just to learn the business world. I was in parallel. I was going to the Berkeley MBA program here in the Bay Area, and so that at that by that point, I felt like okay, I can probably try something on my own, right? So that led to forming the company. So it's and at this point, yeah, after having done this for a few years, it feels like the right fit for what I can offer. Not that I don't feel like I'm a misfit in a corporate environment, but it's about like what's your sweet spot, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you saw the opportunity and had the passion, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean that's what most people. I think it takes a few years to get to that sweet spot of like what do you need, and iterations of trying two or three different things, and so the similar journey. Yeah, for me.
Yeah. Which I think like that move from, the corporate environment to taking the plunge to start on your own. Some people are naturally risk takers and that comes easily to them. And other times, we really have to push ourselves to do that.
Correct, correct. Yeah, and it's a cycle. Sometimes you may do it for some time and say, okay, maybe I need a break and get back to the corporate world and come back. I've seen a lot of examples of that as well.
Yeah. And I think each time people do that, then they're bringing new things to each of the
Right.
environments based on what they learned. So a lot of
That's right.
good cross pollination there. So,
Absolutely.
Sriram, interested like in as we're talking about your career, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self in your first ever leadership role?
So I think to me, I usually don't look back and say I could have done this vastly differently. But I feel like one of the big things that people need to invest in, especially if you're trying to make a switch to running a startup as a first time founder, is to really understand what what is the ingredient for successful startups, right? And for me, for example, as a technologist, this notion of, are you solving a big enough problem, and what is the evidence you can collect before building something? It took me several years to understand, fully appreciate that bit, right? So from a startup context, I would say that is very important, and it applies obviously to bigger companies as well, but it's a make or break, right, for younger companies. So I think just being aware of what's your weak spot. Some people are naturally much better at generating leads, and so their product would be running behind. uh, so it really depends where you are, but just being aware and making sure you have an accelerated learning timeline towards that is is pretty important, right? And so when we were, and I've tried to adapt a little faster. So as the AI wave now rolls in very quickly, so those are the decisions we made to say we are not going to be on the sidelines, right? So this we're going to embrace this much faster now, because this is it's going to disrupt SaaS in a way that has never happened. So if we don't embrace it now, it's we are going to be truly be left behind. So, and then saying at a personal level and then at a company level, how do you help the entire organization keep learning faster, right? And get to a point where as a team, we are then, because it's not that we are going and hiring top AI talent, right? That's not possible. Those people are very much in demand and in short supply, but we have to invest in that learning. And the rate at which you can learn and execute is what matters in whatever you're doing. So I think that's top of mind for me now to say, well, it took me 2-3 years for correcting course on that first set of learnings. So let's do that. Make sure those cycles are faster.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and as you're talking about the AI wave, there's of course the team side that you were just talking about. I'm curious, what are the customer sentiments for you, especially in that kind of SMB mid-market environment? Are you really kind of pushing that conversation with customers? Are they asking you about it? What's the dynamic that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, so I think it's very much a good fit in that for us, the kind of problems that customers are looking to solve requires that we are mainstream with AI, right? Because otherwise, for us, the customers are these big platforms. They already have good engineering teams that can solve the basic problems, but they have not. I guess everybody's trying to catch up in terms of being at the cutting edge of what AI can do, right? To increase outputs. And so to the extent that a startup can be ahead of the curve, then your customers are going to see the value, because then you are eliminating human intervention. You're creating an exponential increase in the output and productivity, right? So that's why it becomes important that otherwise, if it's business as usual, I think the people are often viewing it as table stakes. Anybody can do this. Why should I pay? Like if you look at the GPT, the $20 a month, that pricing has been so disruptive, because now everybody thinks that no SaaS should be priced higher than that. So it's there's a huge impact that has happened at different levels, and yeah, so it's our what we are finding is it's not something where people are looking at it as, oh, this will be relevant later. Like people want to see the impact now. They're ready for it, both on the SMB side as well as platform. Everybody recognizes the importance of what this is going to do.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you brought up the point about kind of the $20 a month, and people are now starting to question bigger investments. I think it was something else, maybe that OpenAI offered that they were charging $200 a month for.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. And they got a lot of pushback, and it's, you can see the jump from 20 to 200, but then when you look at like what it actually enables and the amount of time savings and all of that, it's a good reminder for everyone of like, remember what we're comparing it against and kind of the
that's
traditional
right.
way versus what it enables for an organization.
Yeah, today, because I mean, companies are paying millions in SaaS fees, right, to various companies that are solving like relatively simple things. So in that context, this is really not a whole lot. And that's what now everybody has to compete with.
I think it's a shift in mindset, especially where you're kind of automating things that used to be more kind of people-intensive processes. Your tech budget will go up. In theory, your people budget should go down, or at least not grow as
Right.
you're scaling even better.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's the other important piece, that startups have to really question what the team growth should be, right? When I look at the go-to-market, like a sales, PD, marketing function, that unit and the expenditure you need to have in today's setting needs to be, from an ROI standpoint, it needs to be much higher if you were to maintain the same people, right? And you don't even need a traditional enterprise sales organization the way you used to, because outbound is not working in the same way it used to, and so on. So I think you need to revisit and every part function on how you want to scale. You just can't go by, this is how it's done in SaaS, and so I'll do it.
Yeah. Which I think is it's an area that I'm certainly passionate about, is the transformation that each person as a marketer, as a salesperson, needs to embrace these technologies to be able to kind of get more done while maintaining the quality and thinking differently. And, we're talking about business transformation, but to me, this is like the conversation around personal transformation. We each need to kind of transform the way we work and think, and it goes far beyond kind of technologists.
Absolutely. Yes, you're right. And then that's everyone, each individual is responsible to do that accelerated learning, what we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sriram, this has been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate all the things that you've shared with us. And before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. It's I'm on LinkedIn. So Sriram Subramanian, you'll find me as the link founder on LinkedIn, and my first name SRIRAM @link2any.com is my email as well. So would love to interact with people, address any questions. I like to just keep sharing my thoughts around anything that can help the ecosystem. So, and then have dialogues around all the kind of topics we spoke about today. So I would welcome these conversations.
Great. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure as well. And thank you also to everyone listening. I know I loved hearing about so much of what Sriram shared. And so if today's episode gave you or listeners any valuable insights, please share this with someone. I'm sure that you learned new things, and spreading this kind of knowledge and information helps all of us grow as leaders and helps us drive successful transformation in our organizations. So thanks again. And this has been another fantastic conversation on Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.